The oncology wing was quiet until Jose Ramirez decided it wasn't. Abigail Peterson sat wrapped in a gray cardigan, an IV line taped to her wrist, her skin pale from treatment. Nurses moved softly around her. Families whispered. The chapel doors down the hall stood half open. "You can't stay in that house anymore," Jose said loud enough for strangers to turn. "I'm not carrying you in that mortgage." A few people looked away. A few didn't. He spoke as if the $800,000 home were his burden. He did not know it had never been his to carry. If you believe strength doesn't have to shout to be real, stay with this story until the end. Some truths unfold quietly, and when they do, they change everything. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and your local time. It's always grounding to know how far stories travel. And if you value stories where dignity stands its ground without screaming, consider subscribing. Not for drama, but for justice that documents itself. Irvine, California carried a particular kind of quiet wealth. The streets were wide, the sidewalks clean, the lawns trimmed with mathematical precision. The houses did not shout their value. They suggested it. Behind stone facades and frosted glass doors lived engineers, consultants, executives, people who measured their words as carefully as their investments. Abigail Peterson had grown up in one of those houses. The property on Alder Ridge Drive, valued at just over $800,000 when the market was calm and closer to $1 million when it was not, had belonged to her parents. It had been purchased long before Irvine became what it was now, back when Orange Grove still edged the horizon. Her father had transferred the title into the Peterson family trust years before his death. When both parents passed within 18 months of each other, the trust named Abigail sole beneficiary. The paperwork had been clear. The transfer had been clean. The deed bore only one living name, Abigail Peterson. She was 38 now. She worked remotely as a data systems designer for a medical analytics company, a job that required patience, precision, and the ability to sit with complexity without flinching. It suited her. She had never been loud. She preferred margins to headlines, footnotes to speeches. On her desk, solid oak inherited along with the house, sat a brown leather notebook. She wrote in it daily. Observations, expenses, fragments of conversation that did not feel right. Dates, times, nothing dramatic, just record. When she met Jose Ramirez 12 years earlier, she had not led with ownership. He had been charismatic in the way some men learn to be when they come from less stable beginnings. Raised in San Diego by a single mother who worked double shifts, Jose had built a small logistics consulting firm from scratch. He was proud of it, proud of himself. He liked to tell the story of sleeping in his car between client meetings when cash flow was tight. Abigail admired that in him. What she did not announce, what she never found the right moment to announce, was that the house they dated and then moved into after marriage had already belonged to her. When they married, there was no prenuptial agreement. Not because she had been naive, but because the trust had been structured long before Jose entered her life. The property was legally separate. Her attorney at the time had confirmed it. "You're protected," he had said. She had nodded and filed the reassurance away like a receipt. Jose assumed gradually that the house represented shared progress. He referred to it as our place when speaking to friends. At first, she liked the way that sounded. Our place. It felt like partnership. Over time, subtle shifts began. Jose insisted on handling larger financial conversations. Mortgage discussions, though there was no mortgage. Renovation budgeting, though the upgrades were modest and mostly aesthetic. He enjoyed sitting at the kitchen island with a spreadsheet open explaining percentages, as if she had not worked in analytics for a decade. Abigail let him, not because she was incapable, but because she saw how much he needed to feel essential. When Jose's business had a slow year, she quietly covered more of the shared expenses. Property taxes were paid directly from a trust-managed account tied to her name. Utilities came from a joint account. She never pointed out the distinction. She believed marriage required softness in certain places. But softness can resemble silence, and silence can be misread. The first time Jose mentioned refinancing, Abigail felt something small and cold move through her. "We should pull equity," he said one evening, leaning back in his chair. "Put it into expanding the firm. It's just smart leverage." She had looked at him steadily. "There isn't a mortgage," she reminded him gently. He waved that away. All the more reason. Dead equity is wasted equity. She wrote the date down later that night, not because of the idea itself, but because of the tone. It wasn't consultation. It was assumption. The conversations grew more frequent over the next year. Jose began speaking of long-term strategy, as if the house were a shared asset he could maneuver. He never asked directly whose name was on the title. It never occurred to him that it might not be both. Abigail considered telling him more than once. She imagined the scene, the dining room light casting a soft circle between them, her sliding the trust documents across the table, explaining calmly that the property had been hers from the beginning. But each time she stopped. Part of her feared that clarity would wound him. Jose's pride was not fragile, but it was vigilant. He measured himself against invisible scales. She had seen the way his jaw tightened when friends discussed stock portfolios or second properties. She did not want their marriage to become a comparison. So she kept the paperwork in a fireproof safe in the upstairs closet. Organized, accessible, undiscussed. Then came the diagnosis. The lymphoma was caught early, stage 2A. Treatable, her oncologist said. The prognosis was strong, but treatment would be aggressive for several months. Chemotherapy rearranges more than cells. It rearranges dynamics. At first, Jose was attentive. He drove her to appointments, sat in vinyl chairs, brought smoothies she could barely finish. He told friends she was fighting like a champ. But fatigue lingered longer than either of them expected. Abigail's work hours shortened. She shifted to part-time temporarily. Her energy became a resource to ration. Medical bills arrived in envelopes that looked identical from the outside and heavy from within. Jose began opening them first. "You know, this is adding up," he said one afternoon, tapping a statement against the counter. "We need to be realistic." She looked at him calmly. "We are." He exhaled sharply. "You can't just assume everything will work out." The irony moved through the room unnoticed by him, because everything legally already had. Abigail began documenting more carefully after that. Not arguments, there were few outright arguments. Jose preferred implication to confrontation. But she wrote down phrases. "We need to think about downsizing. This house is too much to maintain right now. Maybe we should consider options." Options. The word began appearing in his vocabulary with quiet regularity. Danielle Harper, the oncology nurse, noticed the shift before Abigail admitted it to herself. Jose no longer stayed for entire sessions. He checked emails constantly. Once he stepped into the hallway to take a call and did not return for 40 minutes. Abigail did not complain. She adjusted. Her notebook entries grew more precise. Dates, statements, financial movements, small inconsistencies. The trust continued to cover property taxes. Insurance documents arrived addressed solely to her. She filed them methodically. There was no anger in her. Not yet. Only clarity gathering itself slowly like storm clouds too distant to hear. Jose still spoke of the house as if it were something he had built. He did not know it had been standing long before he arrived. He did not know his name had never once appeared on the deed. And Abigail, sitting at her desk beneath the afternoon light, filtering through inherited windows, understood something he did not. When power is assumed without verification, it becomes fragile. She closed her notebook gently and placed it back in the drawer. The house was quiet, but not unguarded. The word lymphoma entered their lives on a Tuesday morning that smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. Dr. Patel had spoken carefully with the practiced steadiness of someone who delivered difficult information for a living. Stage 2A. Localized, treatable, A structured chemotherapy protocol, 6 cycles to begin with. The survival statistics were encouraging. The word encouraging hovered in the air like a lifeline no one fully trusted. Abigail Peterson listened without interrupting. She asked measured questions about side effects, about work compatibility, about timelines. She wrote everything down in her brown leather notebook. Jose Ramirez asked only one. How long before things go back to normal? Dr. Patel did not answer that directly. Chemotherapy began 3 weeks later. At first, Jose leaned into the role of devoted husband. He posted filtered photos of hospital wristbands and clasped hands on social media captions full of resilience and faith. Friends commented with heart emojis and promises of prayers. He responded to each one. In the infusion room, Abigail sat quietly with a blanket over her knees, the IV line taped to her wrist. Danielle Harper, the charge nurse, moved with gentle efficiency. Machines hummed. The air carried the sterile stillness of endurance. Jose stayed for the first 2 sessions in full. By the third, he began stepping out to take calls. By the fourth, he arrived late. Abigail did not mention it. She noticed patterns instead. On April 12th, he left the infusion center at 2:17 p.m., saying he had a client emergency. He did not return. She wrote the time down. On April 26th, he sighed audibly while reviewing a hospital billing summary in the waiting area. "This is getting ridiculous," he muttered, not softly enough. Danielle heard it. So did an elderly man 2 chairs away. Abigail recorded the date. Fatigue settled into her bones in ways she had not anticipated. It was not simply tiredness. It was a recalibration of energy. Walking from the bedroom to the kitchen required planning. Concentration drifted like a signal with weak reception. She reduced her work hours officially after the 2nd cycle. Her supervisor was understanding. The company's short-term disability policy supplemented a portion of her income. Jose's tone shifted gradually alongside the financial adjustments. "We need to look at the bigger picture," he said one evening, as they sat at opposite ends of the living room. "Your hours are cut. My business has been unpredictable. This house, it's a lot." Abigail looked at him steadily. "The property taxes are current." "That's not the point," he snapped. Then softened his voice as if smoothing over a wrinkle. "Maintenance, utilities, long-term planning. We can't ignore reality. Reality." It was a word he had begun to use as often. Abigail understood reality better than he did. The trust continued to cover structural expenses automatically. Insurance premiums were withdrawn from an account Jose had never accessed. The foundation beneath their feet was legally immovable. But Jose did not know that. And he was beginning to feel pressure where he believed pressure existed. Medical bills arrived in pale envelopes that accumulated in a neat stack near the kitchen counter. Abigail reviewed each one carefully, cross-referencing insurance explanations of benefits. She flagged discrepancies. She made calls when numbers did not align. Jose watched her one afternoon as she compared statements. "You don't have to obsess over every detail," he said. "It's not like you're the one earning the majority right now." The sentence landed without emphasis. Abigail did not react outwardly. She wrote it down later. May 3rd, 6:42 p.m. "Not like you're the one earning the majority right now." Jose began mentioning the house more frequently in financial discussions. If we sold, we could clear everything and reset. Reset what, she asked gently. Stress, risk, all of it. The idea of selling was presented as strategic, sensible, temporary. Abigail asked a simple question one evening while stirring soup she barely intended to eat. "Where would we go?" Jose hesitated only briefly. "Somewhere smaller, more manageable. Maybe rent for a while." She nodded once. She imagined for a fleeting moment what would happen if she agreed. The listing photographs, the staging, the closing paperwork requiring signatures he did not possess. The sale would stall immediately, because the authority he assumed did not exist. But she did not say that. Instead, she observed something deeper. Jose was not simply concerned about finances. He was unsettled by dependency, hers, and in some ways his own. Her illness disrupted the image he carried of control. The house, large and stable, had once symbolized success. Now, in his narrative, it symbolized liability. Control seeks simplification, and illness complicates everything. By the 5th chemotherapy session, Abigail's hair had thinned enough that she chose to shave it entirely. Jose accompanied her to the salon, but spent most of the appointment scrolling through emails. When the stylist finished, Abigail studied her reflection calmly. She did not cry. Jose avoided eye contact. Later that night, he stood in the doorway of their bedroom and said, "You don't even look like yourself." She closed her eyes briefly. "May 28th, 9:14 p.m. You don't even look like yourself." The comments grew sharper in subtle increments. "This is hard on me too, you know. I didn't sign up for this. You can't expect life to just pause." Each statement carried plausible deniability. None rose to the level of overt cruelty. But together, they formed a pattern. Abigail's notebook pages filled steadily. Danielle Harper noticed the emotional withdrawal during one late afternoon infusion. Jose had left after 20 minutes, citing a networking event. Abigail sat alone, a paperback resting untouched on her lap. "You doing okay?" Danielle asked softly while checking the IV flow. "Yes," Abigail replied. Danielle hesitated. "If you ever need support resources, we have social workers available." Abigail met her eyes. "Thank you. I'll remember that." She wrote Danielle's name down that evening, not as evidence, but as witness. At home, Jose began sleeping later, rising early, keeping unpredictable hours. He spent more time in the home office, door closed. Phone conversations were taken outside on the patio. One evening, Abigail passed by the office and heard him say, "I just need to understand my options." The word again. Options. She did not stop walking. Her energy was limited. She allocated it carefully. Confrontation was expensive. Observation was efficient. Medical scans after the 4th cycle showed promising reduction in lymph node activity. Dr. Patel used the phrase, "excellent response." Abigail allowed herself a quiet breath of relief. Jose responded differently. "That's good," he said flatly when she shared the news. "At least something is stabilizing." At least. The house stood unchanged through all of it. Sunlight filtered through the same windows her parents had installed decades earlier. The oak floors carried the same faint creak near the staircase landing. The property tax statement arrived in her name alone, as it always had. Jose still believed the structure represented shared leverage. He did not ask to see the deed. He did not inquire about the trust. He assumed proximity equaled ownership. Abigail, seated at the kitchen table one evening with a cup of tea she would not finish, felt clarity settle quietly around her. Illness had revealed not only vulnerability, but hierarchy. Jose's concern was no longer primarily about her health. It was about inconvenience, about recalibration of advantage. She did not resent him. She understood him. Understanding, however, does not require surrender. She turned to a fresh page in her notebook. At the top, she wrote a single word, pattern. Then she began listing dates beneath it. Control rarely announces itself. It enters politely. It offers help. It frames itself as efficiency. Jose Ramirez began restructuring their finances in the language of responsibility. "I'll handle the accounts for a while," he said one evening, standing at the kitchen island with his laptop open. "You need to focus on getting better. The last thing you should worry about is money." Abigail Peterson sat across from him, wrapped in a soft cardigan, despite the California warmth. The 4th chemotherapy cycle had left her hands cold more often than not. "That's fine," she said calmly, and she meant it. She had never been territorial about logistics. In their marriage, responsibilities had shifted naturally over time. But there was a difference between support and consolidation. Within 2 weeks, Jose had requested primary online access to their joint checking account, changed notification settings so transaction alerts went only to his phone, suggested closing one of Abigail's smaller personal savings accounts, to simplify things. He positioned each move as streamlining. "You don't need 10 different logins," he said lightly. "It's chaotic." Abigail did not argue. Instead, she began waking earlier. At 5:30 each morning before Jose rose, she sat at her desk and logged into every account still accessible to her. She downloaded monthly statements as PDFs. She saved them into a password-protected cloud folder under a neutral name, Archive 2024. She did not print them yet. She did not need to. The act of preservation was enough. On June 7th, she noticed the first irregularity. A $4,800 withdrawal from their joint account labeled Professional Services, CRG Legal. She recognized neither the firm nor the abbreviation. She wrote it down. June 7th, $4,800, CRG Legal. When Jose came home that evening, she asked gently, "What's CRG Legal?" He didn't hesitate long enough to look guilty. "Consultation for business restructuring," he said. "Tax strategy. Is everything okay?" "Of course," he replied. "I'm protecting us." Protecting us. The phrasing settled into her memory. 2 days later, she scheduled an appointment at the local branch of Pacific Horizon Bank under the pretense of clarifying billing errors. Nathan Cole, a mid-30s financial advisor with careful manners and rimless glasses, met her in a small office that smelled faintly of carpet cleaner. "How can I help you, Miss Peterson?" he asked. She slid a printed summary across the desk. "I'd like a detailed breakdown of recent outgoing transfers," she said evenly, "particularly those coded under professional services." Nathan reviewed the screen. "CRG Legal is registered as Collins, Rivera, and Grant," he said. "They specialize in family and property law." Family and property law. Abigail felt the information settle without visible reaction. "Can you confirm whether these payments are recurring?" she asked. Nathan nodded. "There have been 3 in the past month." She wrote that down. She did not accuse. She did not speculate. She thanked him and left with printed transaction logs neatly stapled. At home, Jose had reorganized more than finances. The filing cabinet in the hallway, once a shared archive of warranties, insurance papers, and tax returns, had been sorted. Certain folders were missing. "Where are the property tax documents?" Abigail asked casually one afternoon. "I consolidated everything," Jose replied from the living room. "It's in the office now. Less clutter." She nodded. That night, after he fell asleep, she entered the office quietly. She did not search recklessly. She moved deliberately. The property tax statements were indeed there, filed under a new tab labeled Assets. She noticed something else. A printed email draft partially visible beneath a stack of business invoices. The subject line read, "Consultation, Residential Rights and Occupancy." She did not read further, not yet. She returned to the bedroom without disturbing the arrangement. The next morning, she documented the folder label. June 12th. Filing cabinet moved. Assets. Control expands when unchallenged. Jose began setting spending limits on the joint debit card. When Abigail attempted to order medical supplies online, the transaction declined. "It's just temporary," he explained when she mentioned it. "Fraud prevention settings. I'll adjust them when needed." She did not ask him to adjust them. Instead, she used her personal credit card, one Jose had once suggested closing, to complete the purchase. Lily Morgan, her cousin, visited on a Sunday afternoon with groceries and lavender hand soap. "You look thinner," Lily said softly, unpacking the bags. "I am," Abigail replied. Lily hesitated. "Is Jose helping?" Abigail considered the question carefully. "He believes he is," she answered. Lily studied her for a moment longer than usual. "If you ever need to stay with me, I know," Abigail said gently. "Thank you." That evening, Jose announced he had scheduled a meeting with a financial planner. "We need a comprehensive reset," he said. "Long-term stability, especially if your income doesn't return fully." The phrasing was clinical. Abigail noticed the subtle assumption embedded in it that her reduced earning capacity might be permanent. "I'll review everything," she replied. He frowned slightly. "There's nothing to review." I've already compiled the numbers. Numbers without full information can be persuasive, but they are not complete. 2 weeks later, another transfer appeared. $6, $200, Collins, Rivera, and Grant. Abigail no longer needed Nathan to confirm the specialty, family and property law. She printed the statements now. She placed them in a thin manila envelope inside the safe upstairs beside the trust documents Jose had never examined. Her health wavered during the 5th chemotherapy cycle. Nausea lingered longer. She slept through entire afternoons. Jose responded with visible impatience, masked as concern. "You need to push through," he said once. "The world doesn't slow down." She looked at him quietly. "The world doesn't," she agreed. He began referring to the house as a liability in conversation with friends. At a small dinner gathering, he said lightly, "We're evaluating whether it makes sense to keep this place." Abigail sat beside him, hands folded loosely in her lap. No one asked her opinion. She wrote that down later. The shift from partnership to positioning was nearly complete. Jose had begun operating as if decisions were unilateral. What he did not realize was that authority depends on foundation. And the foundation of Alder Ridge Drive bore only one name. Abigail felt something steady forming beneath her exhaustion, not anger, not revenge. Alignment. She scheduled a consultation with an attorney the following week. Margaret Collins. The same Collins whose firm name appeared on the bank transfers. Abigail chose the earliest available appointment, not to confront, but to confirm. She closed her notebook that night and placed it beside her bed. Control, she understood now, thrives in ambiguity. Clarity is quieter but stronger. Jose Ramirez did not begin with a demand. He began with suggestion. It was a Thursday evening when he brought it up again. The sky outside fading into a muted lavender behind the silhouette of neighboring rooftops. Abigail Peterson was seated at the kitchen table, a mug of chamomile tea cooling, untouched in her hands. Her energy that day had been thin, stretched carefully between a morning conference call and an afternoon nap that did little to restore her. Jose leaned against the counter, his arms folded. "I spoke to someone about market timing," he said casually. "Inventory's low in Irvine right now. It's a seller's window." Abigail looked up slowly. "You spoke to who, a realtor? Just exploratory." She waited. "Tyler Brooks," he added. "He handles high-value properties in this area." She nodded once. Tyler Brooks. She wrote the name down later. "I didn't agree to list anything," Jose continued, as though anticipating resistance. "I'm just gathering information. We need options." There it was again. Options. Abigail set the mug down gently. "Options for what?" "For stability," he said. "For flexibility. If your treatment drags longer than expected, if your workload doesn't bounce back, if he stopped himself before saying something he could not retract." "If what?" she asked quietly. He exhaled. If things change. Things had already changed. The house had not. Jose moved to the dining table and opened his laptop, rotating the screen toward her. A comparative market analysis filled the display. Estimated listing price $845,000. "We could clear everything," he said. "Start fresh somewhere smaller, less pressure." Abigail studied the numbers without reacting. "What would we do with the difference?" she asked. "Reinvest, strengthen the business, build a cushion." He spoke in future tense as if authorization were implied. She nodded thoughtfully, then closed the laptop screen. "I'd need to review any documents before moving forward," she said evenly. His jaw tightened slightly. "There aren't documents yet." "Then there's nothing to review," she replied. It was not defiance. It was procedure. Jose began spending more time on the phone in the evenings. His office door remained closed longer than usual. Once Abigail passed by and heard him say, "She's not in a position to argue much right now." The sentence was followed by low laughter from the other end. She did not pause outside the door. She did not confront him. She returned to her desk and wrote down the date. The following Monday, while organizing digital files on the shared home computer, Abigail noticed an unfamiliar folder under Jose's name. property transition plan. She opened it without hesitation. Inside were 3 documents. A draft email to Tyler Brooks requesting a preliminary walkthrough. A checklist titled Preparing Occupant for Move. A PDF labeled Voluntary Vacate Agreement Sample. The language in the checklist was clinical. Discuss timeline. Frame as financial necessity. Emphasize medical recovery support elsewhere. Abigail read each line once. She did not scroll twice. She closed the folder and returned to her own workspace. There are moments when confrontation feels justified. There are others when silence gathers more information. She chose the latter. That evening, Jose brought home takeout and a folded brochure. Tyler Brooks Real Estate Group. High-gloss photographs of coastal properties line the pages. "We don't have to decide today," Jose said, placing it on the table in front of her. "But we should be proactive." Abigail flipped through the brochure slowly. "You already scheduled something," she observed. He hesitated. "Just a casual visit. Tyler wants to see the layout." "When Saturday morning?" She held his gaze. "You invited someone to assess this house without discussing it with me first." His tone sharpened. "It's our house." The word "our" carried new weight now. Abigail allowed a small silence to expand between them. "We'll talk before Saturday," she said. Not an argument, a statement. On Friday afternoon, Lily Morgan stopped by unexpectedly with homemade soup. Abigail's energy was low, but she managed a soft smile. Jose mentioned something about selling. Lily asked carefully while unpacking containers. "He's exploring it," Abigail replied. "Do you want to?" Abigail considered the question without hurry. "I want clarity," she said. Lily frowned slightly. "About what? About intention?" Lily studied her cousin's face, the calm, the steadiness that had replaced visible fatigue, with something more grounded. "You're not as fragile as he thinks," Lily said quietly. Abigail did not respond. Saturday arrived bright and unseasonably warm. Tyler Brooks pulled into the driveway at 9:03 a.m., stepping out of a polished SUV with a tablet tucked under his arm. He was confident in the way professionals often are when they assume consent has been secured. Jose greeted him at the door. Abigail stood in the foyer. "Miss Peterson," Tyler said smoothly. "Beautiful property." "Thank you," she replied. He began walking through the living room, commenting on natural light and open concept potential. Jose followed closely, nodding, asking about staging timelines. Abigail moved more slowly behind them. When Tyler reached the kitchen, he turned to Jose. "Given market conditions, we could list within 2 weeks?" Abigail spoke then. "Before any listing discussions proceed," she said calmly, "I need to confirm authority to initiate sale." Tyler paused. Jose laughed lightly. "Of course we have authority." Abigail met Tyler's eyes. "The deed is not jointly held," she said. Silence settled into the kitchen like dust. Tyler's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. "I'd need to verify ownership records before proceeding," he said carefully. Jose looked at her sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means," Abigail replied evenly, "that no one can list this property without my explicit consent." Tyler cleared his throat. "I'll follow up after reviewing county records." He closed his tablet. The visit ended shortly after. Once the front door shut behind the realtor, Jose turned to Abigail. "What was that?" he demanded. "Procedure," she answered. He stared at her confusion flickering beneath irritation. "You're acting like I'm some kind of outsider." She held his gaze without raising her voice. "I'm acting like ownership matters." He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped, because somewhere faintly uncertainty had begun to register. He had never actually seen the deed. He had never requested it. Assumption had carried him this far. But assumption is not documentation. That evening, Abigail placed a copy of the trust summary on her dresser, not to present, not yet, just to remind herself of the foundation beneath her feet. Jose moved restlessly through the house, making phone calls in hushed tones. The word lawyer drifted once down the hallway. Abigail wrote the date down. The shift had begun. Jose believed he was positioning her toward departure. He did not yet understand that he had positioned himself instead. Humiliation does not always arrive as a scream. Sometimes it is delivered in a measured voice carefully calibrated to carry just far enough. The oncology wing was steady that afternoon. Fluorescent lights humming softly, the faint antiseptic scent clinging to the air. Abigail Peterson sat in her usual chair by the window, a thin hospital blanket over her knees. The 6th infusion cycle had begun. The fatigue felt different now, heavier but familiar. Danielle Harper adjusted the IV line with practiced care. "You're tolerating this round well," she said gently. Abigail nodded. "It helps to know it's almost finished." "Who are you, Foots?" Footsteps approached down the hallway. Jose Ramirez entered with the restless energy he had been carrying for weeks. He did not sit immediately. He remained standing, scanning the room as if searching for something misplaced. "We need to talk," he said. Danielle glanced between them. "I can step out if it's fine," Jose interrupted. "This won't take long." Abigail looked up at him calmly. "About what?" she asked. He exhaled sharply, as though inconvenienced by the setting. "About the house," he said, not lowering his voice. "We can't keep pretending everything's normal." A woman across the room shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Abigail's hands remained folded. "What specifically?" she asked. Jose ran a hand through his hair. "You're not working full-time. Your treatment is draining resources. I'm doing everything I can, but I can't carry this alone." The word "carry" again. Danielle's movement slowed, though she did not leave. "We've discussed this," Abigail replied evenly. "No," he said louder now. "You've avoided it. There's no reason for you to stay in that house if we can't sustain it." The phrasing was deliberate. "Stay. Not we stay. You stay." Abigail felt the eyes in the room turn toward her, not curious, not cruel, but aware. Humiliation rarely requires cruelty. It requires audience. Danielle straightened. "Mr. Ramirez," she said carefully, "this may not be the best place for..." "It's exactly the place," he snapped. "This affects her treatment. Financial stress affects recovery." Abigail turned her head slightly toward Danielle. "It's all right," she said softly. She returned her attention to Jose. "You're concerned about sustainability," she said. "I'm concerned about reality," he replied. "We need to sell, or you need to consider staying somewhere cheaper until you're back on your feet." There it was, the reframing of partnership into conditional occupancy. A man 2 chairs down cleared his throat quietly. The woman beside him looked down at her phone. Danielle's jaw tightened. Abigail did not raise her voice. "Is this a decision," she asked calmly, "or a discussion?" Jose hesitated for half a second too long. "It's a necessary step," he said finally. The words hung in the sterile air. Abigail studied him, not angrily, not even sadly, just carefully. The IV pump beeped softly, indicating a rate adjustment. Danielle leaned in to silence it, her movements precise. "Mr. Ramirez," she said again more firmly, "patients need low-stress environments during infusion. If this conversation continues, I'll have to ask you to step outside." Jose looked around the room, finally registering the attention. He lowered his voice, but not his stance. "We'll finish this at home," he said to Abigail. She nodded once. He left without another word. The automatic doors closed behind him with a soft, mechanical sigh. Silence lingered. Danielle knelt slightly so she was level with Abigail. "You don't have to handle that alone," she said quietly. "I know," Abigail replied. She did not elaborate, because what Danielle had witnessed was not merely frustration. It was positioning. When Abigail returned home that evening, the air inside the house felt different, less like shelter, more like territory. Jose was in the office. She passed the doorway and heard his voice tight and urgent. "I'm trying to get clarity on occupancy rights," he said into the phone. "If the property was acquired during marriage, it's joint correct." A pause. "Well, I don't have the deed in front of me." Another pause. "No, it was always our primary residence." Abigail continued walking. He was building arguments on incomplete foundations. In her bedroom, she opened her notebook. July 14th, 2:32 p.m. Oncology Wing. No reason for you to stay in that house. Witnesses present. Nurse Danielle Harper. She underlined the sentence once, not for emphasis, for structure. Later that night, Jose approached her in the kitchen. "You embarrassed me today," he said flatly. She looked up from the sink where she was rinsing a glass. "How making it sound like I don't have authority." "You asked me to consider leaving my own home," she replied calmly. "Our home." She held his gaze. "Authority," she repeated quietly, "is not decided by volume." He stared at her, something unsettled flickering behind his irritation. "You're acting like I'm trying to throw you out." "You said there's no reason for me to stay," she answered. He looked away first. Control depends on narrative. And Jose's narrative was beginning to fracture. The following afternoon, Abigail requested a copy of the Infusion Center's visitor policy from the administrative desk. She framed it as curiosity. She read the clause regarding patient dignity and public disturbance carefully. She also noted that hallway cameras recorded continuously. She did not ask for footage. Not yet. Documentation requires timing. Over the next week, Jose's tone oscillated between conciliatory and cold. "I'm just trying to protect us," he said one morning. From what she asked? From collapse. She nodded slowly. Collapse, she knew, does not begin with paperwork. It begins with miscalculation. On Friday, a certified letter arrived addressed to Jose from Collins, Rivera, and Grant. He opened it in the living room, without noticing her watching. His face tightened. "What is it?" she asked gently. "Just clarifications," he muttered, folding the paper too quickly. He did not realize she already knew the firm's specialty. He did not realize the bank statements were printed and secured. He did not realize that the trust documents upstairs rendered his consultations strategically hollow. Humiliation at the hospital had not broken Abigail. It had clarified something essential. Jose believed public pressure could accelerate compliance. He believed vulnerability equaled leverage. He believed assumption equaled ownership. He did not know that each public statement created witness. Each witness created record. Each record, when aligned with documentation, became structure. And structure does not bend easily. That night, as the house settled into quiet darkness, Abigail stood at the top of the staircase and looked down at the living room, where Jose sat alone, scrolling through his phone. The house was silent, but not uncertain. She returned to her desk and opened a new page. At the top, she wrote Escalation. Then she began listing dates. Escalation rarely looks dramatic at first. It looks procedural. 3 days after the Infusion incident, Abigail Peterson sat at her desk reviewing system reports for work when a notification flickered briefly across the shared desktop screen. Jose Ramirez had left his email account logged in the night before. He was careless when preoccupied. The subject line appeared only for a second before disappearing. Re-strategy for voluntary departure. Abigail did not move immediately. She finished the paragraph she had been drafting for her supervisor. She saved the file. Then, with the same measured calm she applied to data audits, she opened the browser history. The email platform loaded automatically. She did not search randomly. She typed the name she already knew. Collins, Rivera, and Grant. There it was, an email thread spanning nearly 4 weeks. She clicked. The first message had been sent by Jose. "I need to understand my options regarding residential removal. My spouse is currently undergoing medical treatment and not contributing financially at prior levels. The property is our primary residence. I would like to explore legal pathways for separation of occupancy." Abigail read the sentence twice. Not because it shocked her, because precision matters. The attorney's response was cautious. "Please provide documentation of property title. If acquired during marriage, it may be considered community property under California law. If separate property removal is significantly more complex, we advise consultation before any direct action." Jose's reply came quickly. "The home has been ours since marriage. Hours. Assertion without verification. Abigail scrolled further. Another message dated 5 days earlier. Client wishes to initiate voluntary vacate discussion within 30 days. Concerned about optics due to medical situation. Requests guidance on minimizing exposure. Minimizing exposure. She closed her eyes briefly. Not in pain, in alignment. This was no longer suggestion. This was strategy. She forwarded the entire thread to her private encrypted email account. She ensured the headers remained intact. She saved a PDF copy to a secure cloud folder labeled Medical Administrative. Then she logged out of Jose's email and cleared the screen. When Jose returned home that evening, he behaved as though nothing had shifted. Tyler thinks we should revisit timing in August, he said while placing his keys on the counter. Market might soften. Abigail nodded, studying him quietly. How's your day, he asked. Productive, she replied. That word, again, productivity. Jose's discomfort with her illness had increasingly centered on output. Hours worked, income generated, efficiency restored. He did not know she had just archived the clearest evidence yet of his intent. 2 mornings later, Abigail drove herself to downtown Irvine for her appointment with Margaret Collins. The law office was understated glass walls, neutral tones, quiet confidence. Margaret Collins greeted her personally. She was in her mid-50s, silver threaded neatly through dark hair, her posture upright without rigidity. Miss Peterson, she said warmly. Please call me Margaret. They sat in a private conference room. How can I assist you? Margaret asked. Abigail placed a slim folder on the table. I need clarity, she said evenly, regarding residential rights. Margaret opened the folder. Inside were the Peterson Family Trust document summary, the recorded deed listing Abigail Peterson as sole beneficiary, property tax statements for the past 3 years, printed bank records showing payments to Collins Rivera and Grant, the email thread she had forwarded. Margaret reviewed each document carefully, her expression neutral but attentive. After several minutes, she looked up. You acquired this property before marriage? She asked. Yes. Title has never included your spouse. Numbers. Margaret nodded once. Under California law, this is separate property. Community property statutes do not apply unless commingling occurred in a way that changes character. From what I see here, that has not happened. Abigail listened without visible reaction. Can my husband force me to leave? She asked. No, Margaret replied firmly, not without legal grounds unrelated to ownership, and certainly not based on income fluctuation due to medical treatment. The words settled solidly. Margaret tapped the printed email thread lightly. This, she said, demonstrates intent. It's not illegal to consult counsel, but attempting to engineer removal under false property assumptions is problematic. Should I confront him? Abigail asked. Margaret considered. Confrontation is optional, she said. Documentation is not. Continue preserving records. If he escalates, changes, locks, restricts access, or harasses you, notify me immediately. Abigail nodded. I don't want retaliation, she said quietly. I want stability. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Stability, she repeated. Then we proceed carefully. On her way home, Abigail felt neither triumph nor relief, only confirmation. Jose's strategy rested on the belief that vulnerability weakened her standing. But legally, her position was fixed. That evening, Jose paced the kitchen while on speakerphone. I'm trying to move forward responsibly, he said to someone, likely the same firm. But she's becoming resistant. Resistant. Abigail stood at the sink rinsing a plate. She did not look at him. Because resistance implies opposition. She was not opposing him. She was simply not vacating. Later that night, another email notification appeared briefly while Jose showered. Revoluntary vacate timeline. She did not open it this time. She did not need to. She already understood the direction of travel. Instead, she opened her notebook. July 19th. Email evidence preserved. Consultation with MC. Separate property confirmed. Strategy maintain documentation. No confrontation. Her handwriting remained steady. Outside, the evening air settled into quiet. Inside, Jose typed rapidly in the office, unaware that his own documentation was forming a counterweight. He believed control could be negotiated through pressure. He believed public embarrassment could accelerate compliance. He believed silence equaled weakness. He did not yet understand that Abigail's silence was structural, not passive, structural. When he emerged from the office, he paused at the doorway of the living room. "We need to finalize a timeline," he said. "For what?" she asked calmly. "For next steps." Abigail met his gaze evenly. "I'm not leaving my home," she said. He stared at her. It was the first direct statement she had made. Not loud, not emotional, just clear. "You don't get to decide that alone," he replied sharply. She held his eyes. "You don't get to decide it at all." Something in his expression shifted, then not comprehension but doubt. Because for the first time he sensed there was information he did not possess. And doubt, once introduced, spreads quickly. Abigail closed her notebook and stood. The house remained steady around them. Walls do not tremble because someone miscalculates ownership. Foundations do not weaken because assumption grows louder. Escalation had begun, but so had alignment. And alignment, once anchored in documentation, does not require volume to prevail. Money leaves a trail. It does not argue. It does not reinterpret itself. It records. Abigail Peterson understood this instinctively. Data had always felt more honest to her than conversation. Conversations shift tone. Numbers do not. 3 days after her consultation with Margaret Collins, another transfer appeared on the joint account. $9,750 CRG legal retainer adjustment. The amount was larger than the previous payments. Abigail did not react outwardly. She logged into Pacific Horizon Bank at 5:42 a.m. The house still quiet, Jose asleep upstairs. She downloaded the updated statement, saved it to her secure folder, then printed 2 copies, one for the safe one. For Margaret. She added the transaction to her timeline. July 23rd. Retainer increase. Escalation confirmed. Later that morning, she scheduled another meeting with Nathan Cole at the bank. Nathan greeted her with the same professional courtesy as before, though his eyes lingered slightly longer this time. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "I need a full 12-month transaction history on the joint account," she said evenly, including wire transfers and service payments. Nathan nodded. "Of course." As the printer hummed behind him, Abigail considered how control often hides inside shared accounts. The illusion of unity makes scrutiny feel unnecessary. Nathan handed her a stapled packet nearly an inch thick. "There's been a noticeable uptick in professional service payments," he said carefully. "Would you like to restrict large transfers?" "Not yet," she replied. "Not yet. Restriction too early can alert the other party. Documentation first." She flipped through the pages slowly. Patterns emerged. Initial legal consultation payment. Follow-up strategy session. Retainer increase. A $2,300 payment labeled Property Valuation Report. A smaller $780 charge for process advisory. The language was careful, but the intent was visible. "Has there been any attempt to alter account authorization?" she asked Nathan. He reviewed the screen. "There was an inquiry about modifying signatory access," he said. "It wasn't completed. Both parties must consent." Abigail nodded. "Please flag any future attempts," she said calmly. "I can set an alert," Nathan replied. She thanked him and left with the document secured inside a plain manila envelope. When she returned home, Jose was seated at the dining table, reviewing spreadsheets. "We need to talk about expenses," he said without looking up. "Which ones?" she asked. "All of them." She sat opposite him. He rotated the laptop screen toward her. A projected 6-month forecast filled the display. "If your income stays reduced and we keep absorbing treatment costs, we're operating at a deficit," he said. She scanned the numbers. "You've allocated $15,000 under a legal contingency," she observed. His jaw tightened. "That's business-related." "Which business?" she asked quietly. He closed the laptop halfway. You don't trust me. Trust is not the absence of documentation. I prefer transparency, she replied. He leaned back in his chair. You're being difficult. She did not respond. Because difficulty is subjective. Records are not. That evening, while Jose showered, Abigail accessed the home router's administrative log. She had installed it years ago and retained the credentials. She was not searching for private content. She was reviewing access timestamps, multiple late-night sessions to the CRG legal portal, repeated visits to county property search databases, download activity at 1:13 a.m. 3 nights earlier. He was looking for confirmation. He had not found it. The county database would have shown only one recorded owner, Abigail Peterson. She closed the rotor log and added the timestamps to her notebook. July 25th. Property search activity. 1:13 a.m. repeated access. The following afternoon, Jose received a phone call while standing in the living room. Abigail was seated on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders. Yes, I understand, he said into the phone, pacing slowly. But she's not cooperating. A pause. No, the title hasn't been updated. Another pause. I was under the impression, his voice lowered. Abigail did not strain to hear. She did not need the rest. After he hung up, he stood motionless for several seconds. What do they say? She asked calmly. He looked at her, measuring something. They need documentation, he said finally. Of what? He hesitated. Of ownership. She held his gaze. And what did you provide? His silence answered. In the quiet that followed, something subtle shifted. Not confrontation, not confession. Awareness. Jose began spending more time reviewing files upstairs. One evening, Abigail heard drawers opening in the hallway cabinet, the one he had reorganized weeks earlier. He was searching. She did not intervene, because the documents he sought were not there. They were in the safe, and in Margaret Collins' office, and now partially in the bank's alert system. The next bank statement arrived digitally on August 1st. Another payment. $3 100 CRG legal draft preparation. Draft of what Abigail wondered. She did not speculate. She emailed Margaret instead. Subject updated financial activity attached were the 12-month transaction history, highlighted legal payments, router log timestamps, the original email thread. Margaret responded within hours. We are approaching actionable territory. Continue preserving. Do not restrict funds yet. Let him reveal full strategy. Revelation requires patience. That night, Jose approached her in the bedroom. I spoke with counsel, he said. I assumed she replied. He watched her carefully. They believe this property falls under marital residence classification, he said. She tilted her head slightly. Based on what documentation they said, we need to review acquisition timeline. We should, she agreed. The calm unsettled him more than anger would have. You're acting like you have some hidden advantage, he said. She looked at him steadily. I have documentation, she replied. He searched her face for sarcasm. There was none, only certainty. Money had exposed his movements more clearly than emotion ever could. Every transfer, every consultation, every attempt to adjust authorization, control when routed through bank systems leaves footprints. And footprints can be mapped. Jose had assumed that financial management equaled authority. He had not accounted for traceability. Abigail closed her notebook that evening and placed it beside the trust documents in the safe. The pattern was complete now: public pressure, legal consultation, financial maneuvering, property inquiry, escalation through infrastructure. But infrastructure can collapse under incorrect assumptions. Jose still believed that authority could be negotiated. He did not yet understand that authority in this case was recorded long before he entered the house. And records once verified do not adjust themselves to pride. Outside, Irvine remained composed and orderly. Inside, the architecture of assumption was beginning to crack, not loudly, but definitively. Evidence does not raise its voice. It waits. The camera had been installed 3 years earlier, long before illness entered the house. It was a standard doorbell camera, matte black, discreet position slightly above eye level beside the front door. Jose had insisted on it after a package theft in the neighborhood. Security is basic, he had said at the time. Abigail had agreed. Security is basic. She had configured the system herself. The cloud storage account was under her email, an administrative detail Jose had never questioned. He rarely involved himself in setup procedures. He preferred outcomes. On a Tuesday afternoon in early August, while reviewing archived footage to delete older files and free storage space, Abigail noticed a familiar timestamp, July 28th, 6:14 p.m. She remembered the evening vaguely heat lingering in the driveway, the scent of jasmine from the side yard. She clicked play. The video showed Jose standing just outside the front door, phone pressed to his ear. He must have stepped out to avoid being overheard inside. His voice was clear. "I'm telling you she's weak right now," he said. "If I push the right way, she'll fold." A pause. "No, she doesn't have independent leverage. The house was ours before we got serious." Another pause. "Once she's out, it's cleaner. I can restructure everything without her in the way. Without her in the way." Abigail watched the clip once, then again, not for emotion, for clarity. He paced slightly on the porch as he spoke. "I just need the paperwork airtight before I present it," he continued. "If she resists, I'll frame it as medical necessity. Medical necessity." The phrase settled into something colder than anger. The video ended with him opening the door and stepping back inside, unaware that the device beside him had recorded every word. Abigail leaned back in her chair. There are moments in life when assumption collapses into evidence. This was one. She checked the camera's metadata, date verified, time verified, audio intact, original file unaltered. She downloaded the clip directly to an external encrypted drive. Then she duplicated it into her secure cloud folder, preserving original format and metadata. Chain of custody matters. She labeled the file July 28th. Porch call intent. She did not confront him. She did not mention it. Instead, she scheduled a follow-up appointment with Margaret Collins. The next morning, she arrived at the law office carrying a slim flash drive inside a padded envelope. Margaret reviewed the bank statements first, nodding as she skimmed the highlighted entries. "He's escalating financially," she observed. "Yes," Abigail replied. And emotionally, Abigail placed the flash drive on the table. "There's audio," she said simply. Margaret inserted the drive into her secure laptop and played the file. She listened, without interrupting her expression, professional, but tightening slightly at certain phrases. When the recording ended, she removed the drive and folded her hands. "This demonstrates intent to manipulate occupancy under false pretenses," she said calmly. "It's not illegal to strategize, but framing removal under fabricated financial vulnerability is problematic." Abigail nodded. "Is the recording lawful?" she asked. "In California, recording conversations without consent can be complicated," Margaret replied carefully. "However, this was captured by a fixed security system on your property in a location where there is limited expectation of privacy. He was on your porch. We would argue legitimacy." Abigail listened. "We will not deploy this immediately," Margaret continued, "but it strengthens your position significantly. Strength." The word felt different now, not emotional strength, structural strength. Margaret outlined next steps: draft a formal notice affirming separate property ownership. Send a cease and desist regarding coercive removal attempts. Prepare documentation in case he attempts lock changes or utility interference. Monitor financial activity, but do not freeze accounts yet. He may attempt a final push. Before realizing his position, Margaret said. Abigail understood. When confronted with loss of control, escalation often spikes. That evening, Jose returned home later than usual. He appeared restless, pacing through the kitchen before settling at the island. "I've been thinking," he said. She waited. "This situation isn't sustainable," he continued. Your recovery could take longer than expected. It might be healthier for you to stay somewhere less tense. Less tense. You mean somewhere else? She said, temporarily. She studied him quietly. And who would remain here, she asked. He hesitated. I would. To manage logistics. Logistics. The word almost sounded clinical. Jose, she said softly, are you trying to move me out of my home? He stiffened. Our home. She held his gaze. He did not know about the video. He did not know Margaret had heard his voice. He did not know the bank alerts were active. I'm trying to prevent collapse, he insisted. Collapse of what, she asked again. He did not answer, because collapse implies shared downfall. And his strategy had been unilateral. Later that night, he returned to the porch for another phone call. This time, his voice was lower. I may have miscalculated, he said into the darkness. Abigail did not need to watch the footage to know. Miscalculation begins when assumption meets documentation. She lay in bed that night, not triumphant, not relieved, just aware. The architecture of his plan had depended on 3 pillars: her illness as leverage, financial pressure as urgency, shared ownership as fact. 2 were weakening. The third had never existed. In the quiet of the house, Abigail considered the difference between noise and evidence. Noise demands reaction. Evidence requires timing. She was not seeking revenge. She was seeking correction. The video file rested in encrypted storage. The bank statements were cataloged. The trust deed was verified. Jose moved through the house the next morning with an undercurrent of unease. He avoided direct eye contact. His phone remained close to his hand. Doubt had entered him fully now. Because somewhere in his consultations, someone had likely said the words, if the property is separate, removal is significantly more complex. He was beginning to realize he had never confirmed the foundation. Abigail stood at the kitchen window, sunlight falling across the counter her mother had once chosen. The house did not feel threatened. It felt steady. Security is basic. Jose had installed the camera for protection. He had not anticipated what it would protect against. Evidence does not shout. It waits. And when aligned with documentation, it becomes unshakable. Legal procedure is not dramatic. It is deliberate. Margaret Collins did not rush. 3 days after reviewing the porch recording, she sent Abigail a draft letter titled Formal Notice of Separate Property Confirmation and Demand to Cease Coercive Conduct. The language was restrained, precise, devoid of accusation. It outlined the acquisition date of the Alder Ridge Drive property, the existence of the Peterson family trust, recorded deed documentation listing Abigail Peterson as sole beneficiary, a reminder that California law recognizes separate property acquired prior to marriage, a request that any attempts to pressure, misrepresent, or engineer removal cease immediately. There was no mention of the video, no reference to financial transfers. Margaret believed in incremental disclosure. Control the pace, she had said during their last meeting. Let him feel the ground shift gradually. Abigail reviewed the draft slowly, line by line. She corrected nothing. Send it, she replied. The letter was delivered via certified mail and email simultaneously. Jose received it at 10:14 a.m. on a Wednesday. Abigail was in the living room when she heard the front door open and close with unusual force. She did not look up immediately. Paper tore open in the kitchen. Silence followed. Then footsteps. What is this? Jose demanded, standing in the doorway. She folded the throw blanket beside her before answering. It's clarification, she said. He held the letter in his hand, the firm's letterhead unmistakable. You went behind my back. I sought legal clarity, she replied. You hired a lawyer. Yes. His voice sharpened. Over our house. My house, she corrected softly. The correction landed harder than accusation would have. He stared at her confusion, now mingling with anger. What are you talking about? The property on Alder Ridge Drive, she said evenly, is held in the Peterson family trust. It was transferred to me before our marriage. He blinked. That's not possible. It is documented. He unfolded the letter again, scanning rapidly. This says sole beneficiary, he muttered. Yes, you never told me. You never asked, she replied. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument they had ever had. Jose's identity builder provider co-owner had included the house as part of its architecture. He had spoken of it in wealthy meetings, referenced it in financial conversations, considered leveraging it. Now the foundation had shifted. So what does this mean, he asked finally. It means you cannot list refinance transfer or remove me from this property without my consent. He ran a hand through his hair. We're married. Yes, that makes it ours. Not legally. He paced once across the living room. You let me believe I let you assume, she said calmly. His breathing grew uneven. You're using technicalities, he snapped. I'm using documentation. The difference mattered. He moved toward the hallway cabinet, as if searching for something tangible to contradict her claim. He opened drawers, shuffled through folders. Where are the title documents, he demanded. In the safe, she replied. Open it. No. His eyes flashed. Why not? Because access is not mutual. The truth was not delivered with cruelty, just accuracy. Jose stepped back as though recalibrating his understanding of the room. I invested here, he said. In renovations, she acknowledged. Those are discussable. Ownership is not. He laughed once, short, disbelieving. So this whole time I've just been... What a guest you've been, my husband, she said. The distinction was subtle and devastating. He left the house without another word. Abigail did not follow. She opened her notebook. August 3rd. Formal notice delivered. Initial reaction denial. Accusation. Search for documents. She underlined nothing. She did not need emphasis. 2 hours later, Margaret called. He received it, she asked. Yes. Response shock. Margaret exhaled quietly. He may attempt one of two things, she said. Aggressive escalation or rapid retreat. Be prepared for either. What qualifies as escalation, Abigail asked. Lock changes, utility interference, financial freeze attempts, or intimidation? Abigail nodded. Utilities are in my name, Mom, she said. Good. Property taxes auto-drafted from trust. Good. The joint account remains open. For now, Margaret replied. Let him move first. That evening, Jose returned with a different energy. Quieter, calculated. We need to talk about division of assets, he said carefully. There's nothing to divide regarding the house, she answered. What about appreciation during marriage, he pressed. That's a legal discussion, she said. You have counsel. He stared at her. You've been planning this, he accused. No, she replied. I've been documenting. He fell silent. Documentation is neutral. It does not plan. It preserves. Over the next 48 hours, Jose made several phone calls from inside the house, rather than stepping outside. His tone was lower, more restrained. I need to reassess, he said into the receiver at one point. I was under a different understanding. Assumption reframed. The bank alert triggered on Friday morning. Attempted change to account authorization declined due to dual consent requirement. Nathan Cole emailed immediately. Unauthorized modification attempt flagged. No changes processed. Abigail forwarded the message to Margaret without comment. By Saturday, the house felt less like contested territory and more like exposed ground. Jose moved cautiously now. He no longer mentioned selling. He no longer referenced timelines. Instead, he asked measured questions. When exactly was the trust created before I met you? Why didn't you add my name later? Because it was not necessary. The simplicity unsettled him. Control had shifted not through confrontation, not through humiliation, but through paper. Legal procedure had begun its slow compression. Margaret sent a second letter on Monday. This one shorter. It reiterated ownership and warned that any retaliatory conduct, financial or residential, would be met with immediate legal response. No threats, just structure. Jose read it in silence. He no longer raised his voice. He no longer declared authority. Instead, he asked one final question that evening. So, what happens now? Abigail looked around the living room, the framed photographs, the inherited furniture, the sunlight falling exactly as it had for decades. Now, she said quietly, we proceed honestly. Honesty in this context did not mean reconciliation. It meant reality. Legal reality. The house had always belonged to Abigail Peterson. It would continue to. And for the first time since Escalation began, Jose understood that his leverage had never existed. He had been negotiating with assumptions. She had been standing on record. Legal procedure had done what confrontation could not. It had replaced narrative with fact. And fact, once acknowledged, does not retreat. Control does not surrender gracefully. It tightens first, for 2 days after the second letter from Margaret Collins arrived, Jose Ramirez remained uncharacteristically restrained. He moved through the house carefully as though any sudden motion might confirm the fragility of his position. His voice softened. His footsteps lightened. But restraint born of shock rarely lasts. By Thursday evening, Escalation returned quieter, sharper. Abigail Peterson discovered it indirectly. At 7:12 p.m., her laptop disconnected from the Wi-Fi network. She attempted to reconnect. Incorrect password. She tried again. The same result. She walked to the living room where Jose sat with his phone in his hand. The Wi-Fi password changed, she said evenly. He didn't look up immediately. I updated the router for security, he replied. There were vulnerabilities. I need access for work, she said. He shrugged slightly. You're not full-time right now. The statement was delivered casually, measured, calculated. Abigail studied him. Provide the password, she said. I will, he answered, though he did not move. She waited. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Jose? He looked up finally. I think it's time we establish separate systems, he said. Given the situation. Separate systems. The phrase was designed to sound administrative. It was not. She did not argue. Instead, she took her phone, activated her personal hotspot, and returned to her desk. Documentation first. At 7:29 p.m., she wrote in her notebook, August 11th. Wi-Fi credentials altered. Access delayed upon request. She then emailed Margaret. Subject, utility interference minor, but noted Margaret responded within the hour. Continue documenting. If pattern persists, we escalate formally. The following morning, Abigail attempted to log into the joint utility account for the electricity provider. Access denied. She reset the password. Notification primary account holder updated. Jose had moved the account under his email. The electricity bill was still auto-paid from the trust-linked account. But access visibility had shifted. Another entry in the notebook. August 12th. Utility account primary holder changed. Jose left early that day without speaking. When he returned in the afternoon, he was carrying a small hardware store bag. Abigail noticed it when he walked past her toward the garage. An hour later, she heard metallic sounds near the side entrance. She stood slowly and walked toward the sound. Jose was examining the side door lock with a screwdriver. What are you doing? She asked calmly. Upgrading security, he replied. Without discussing it, it's my house too. The sentence emerged reflexively. She did not correct him this time. Instead, she said, do not replace any locks. He paused. Why? Because access cannot be restricted. Restricted, he repeated. You're still here. For now, she replied. The phrase unsettled him. What does that mean? It means legal counsel has advised against unilateral changes. He stared at her. You're threatening me. I'm informing you. He set the screwdriver down, jaw tight. Later that evening, a louder escalation arrived. At 9:17 p.m. Abigail's phone vibrated. Unknown number. She answered. Mrs. Ramirez, a male voice asked. This is Abigail Peterson, she corrected gently. Ma'am, we received a report of domestic disturbance at your address. She looked towards Jose, who stood in the kitchen, arms folded. There is no disturbance, she replied calmly. We're required to check, the officer said. Moments later, Officer Raymond Clark stood at the front door. He was professional, composed, mid-40s, with a patient demeanor of someone accustomed to volatile misunderstandings. "Evening," he said. "We received a call." Jose stepped forward first. "I'm concerned about her stability," he said. "She's under treatment. Stress levels are high." Abigail met the officer's eyes directly. "There has been no disturbance," she said evenly. "We are having a legal property disagreement." Officer Clark glanced between them. "Has anyone been threatened?" he asked. "No," Abigail answered. Jose hesitated. "No," he admitted. Officer Clark nodded slowly. "So we're making precautionary calls without incident isn't appropriate," he said calmly. "If there's no immediate danger, this becomes a civil matter." Civil matter. 2 words that landed heavier than accusation. Jose looked irritated. "I was concerned," he insisted. "Concern is not the same as emergency," Officer Clark replied. He turned slightly toward Abigail. "Ma'am, if you ever feel unsafe, you call us directly." "I understand," she said. The officer left without further comment. The door closed. Silence filled the room. "You called the police," Abigail said quietly. "I was protecting myself," Jose snapped. From what, he didn't answer. Because the call had not been about protection. It had been about pressure. Escalation had moved from financial to infrastructural to reputational. Abigail returned to her desk and documented everything. August 12th. 9:17 p.m. Police dispatched. No incident confirmed. Officer Raymond Clark. She emailed Margaret again. This time, Margaret's response came faster. "We proceed with a temporary protective notice regarding residential interference. Not a restraining order yet. A formal warning." The next morning, a courier delivered a third letter. This one addressed specific actions: unauthorized account modifications, attempted lock changes, improper police involvement without cause. It demanded cessation. Jose read it slowly. His posture changed. Not anger, not denial. Something closer to recognition. "You're building a case," he said. "I'm building a record," she replied. He sank into a chair. "This is insane." "No," she said quietly. "This is documentation." He looked at her differently now. Not as someone weak, not as someone pliable, but as someone structured. Illness had not removed her foundation. It had revealed his. He had assumed escalation would overwhelm her. Instead, each escalation had strengthened her position, because reaction creates evidence, and evidence accumulates. That evening, he did not touch the locks. He restored Wi-Fi access without comment. He forwarded her the updated utility login credentials. Small reversals, not apology. But recalibration. Control, when challenged by law, narrows. Jose had attempted to leverage vulnerability. He had attempted to reframe stability as threat. He had attempted to introduce external authority to intimidate. None of it had shifted ownership. Abigail sat in the quiet of the living room that night, a soft lamp casting steady light across the walls her parents once painted. She did not feel victorious. She felt aligned. Escalation had reached its visible peak. What remained now was procedure, and procedure does not tremble. Reality, when finally spoken aloud, does not need emphasis. It only needs paper. Margaret Collins scheduled the meeting for a Monday afternoon. Not a court hearing, not yet. A formal conference at her office with documentation presented in structured sequence. Jose Ramirez agreed to attend after his attorney, an associate from Collins Rivera. And Grant advised him that clarity was preferable to continued miscalculation. The irony did not go unnoticed. At 2:00 p.m., they sat across a polished conference table. Abigail Peterson appeared composed, her hair still growing back in soft, uneven strands. She wore a simple navy blouse and carried a thin leather folder. Jose arrived with a thicker binder. Margaret began without ceremony. "We are here," she said evenly, "to establish verified ownership and clarify residential rights." Jose shifted slightly in his seat. His attorney, Daniel Rivera, opened his binder first. Our understanding, Rivera began carefully, is that the property has served as the marital residence for 12 years. It has, Margaret replied. Rivera nodded. Under California community property principles, Margaret raised a hand gently. Community property applies to assets acquired during marriage or commingled in a manner that alters classification. She turned to Abigail. Miss Peterson, may I? Abigail slid her folder forward. Inside were the Peterson family trust formation document dated 8 years before marriage. The recorded deed transferring title to Abigail as sole beneficiary, county registry certification, property tax statements spanning 12 years each bearing her name exclusively, insurance declarations listing her as primary insured. Margaret handed copies across the table. Rivera scanned them, flipping pages faster as he moved. Jose leaned forward. What does that mean? He asked quietly. It means Rivera said carefully the property was acquired prior to marriage and maintained separately. Jose looked at Abigail. You never added me, he said. It was not required, she replied. Rivera cleared his throat. There is no evidence of transmutation, he added. No written agreement altering property character. Margaret nodded. Correct. Silence settled. Jose's posture shifted, shoulders lowering slightly as comprehension began replacing resistance. But we paid expenses together, he said. Utilities, Margaret acknowledged. Routine living costs do not convert separate property into community property. Structural expenses remain tied to the trust. Jose turned to his attorney. Is there any claim, he asked? Rivera hesitated. Appreciation during marriage may be argued under certain conditions if community funds contributed significantly to equity growth, he said carefully. But given absence of mortgage and clear trust management, the argument would be limited. Limited. The word carried weight. Margaret opened another folder. We are not here to debate hypothetical appreciation, she said calmly. We are here because Mr. Ramirez has engaged in actions suggesting attempted removal. She placed printed documents on the table. Bank statements highlighting legal payments, router logs showing late-night property searches, email correspondence regarding voluntary departure, a transcript of the porch recording. Jose's head snapped up. You recorded me. It was captured by an exterior security device on the property, Margaret replied evenly. On Miss Peterson's property, Rivera read the transcript carefully. The words lay flat on paper. If I push the right way, she'll fold. Once she's out, it's cleaner. Jose exhaled slowly. That was taken out of context, he said. Context is preserved in the recording, Margaret answered. Rivera closed the folder gently. This complicates things, he said to Jose. Complicates. Understatement. Margaret continued. In addition, there was an attempted change to account authorization and police involvement absent incident. We have documented each occurrence. Jose's hands rested flat on the table now. You're painting me as a criminal, he said quietly. No, Abigail replied, for the first time since the meeting began. I am presenting a record. Her voice was steady, not angry, not wounded, just clear. Rivera looked between them. My client believed he was protecting financial stability, he offered. By removing his ill spouse from her own home, Margaret asked. The question was not raised, it was placed. Jose did not answer, because for the first time, the structure of his strategy stood exposed in neutral language. No shouting, no humiliation, just documentation. Margaret folded her hands. Our position is simple. Miss Peterson retains sole ownership. Any further attempts to interfere with her occupancy will result in immediate filing for protective orders and financial remedies. Rivera nodded slowly. I would advise de-escalation, he said to Jose. Jose stared at the trust document again. The signature date, the notarization, the county seal, all older than his marriage, all immovable. He leaned back in his chair. I assumed, he said quietly. Yes, Abigail replied. The word hung between them. Assumption had been the foundation of his leverage, and it had never existed. Rivera closed his binder. I recommend we shift focus to equitable separation discussion rather than occupancy contest, he said carefully. Separation. The word arrived without drama. Margaret nodded. That is appropriate. Jose looked at Abigail again. You're serious, he said. I am. There was no triumph in her expression, only resolution, because this moment was not about punishment. It was about correction. Ownership had been confirmed. Intent had been documented. Escalation had been recorded. Now came procedure. Margaret outlined next steps. Formal acknowledgement of separate property status. Immediate cessation of interference. Negotiation of financial disentanglement under marital law. Temporary residential boundaries within the home until formal arrangements finalized. Jose listened without interruption. The man who once spoke in declarations now listened in silence. Power had shifted, not because she shouted, but because she preserved. When the meeting ended, Rivera remained behind briefly to speak with Margaret. Jose and Abigail walked toward the parking lot together. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. I didn't know, he said finally. I know, she replied. You let me believe I let you assume, she said again. He stopped walking. You could have told me years ago. Yes, she agreed. And you didn't? No. He searched her face. Why? She considered the answer carefully. Because partnership does not require ownership, she said. He looked away. For the first time since this began, he did not appear angry. He appeared diminished, not by her, by fact. They reached their cars. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, she replied. It isn't. But the foundation had been set. The house on Alder Ridge Drive remained exactly what it had always been hers. And now fully acknowledged as such, documentation had replaced assumption. And assumption does not recover once exposed. Courtrooms are rarely loud in real life. They are procedural, measured, air-conditioned to a degree that makes everyone slightly uncomfortable. The hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. on a Thursday in Orange County Superior Court. Not a divorce trial, not yet. A preliminary hearing regarding residential interference financial conduct and temporary protective provisions. Judge Eleanor Whitman presided. She was known for efficiency rather than spectacle. Gray hair pulled neatly back, thin reading glasses low on her nose, voice controlled and unhurried. Abigail Peterson sat beside Margaret Collins at the petitioner's table. She wore a light gray blazer sleeve slightly too long over wrists still thinner from treatment. Her brown leather notebook rested closed in her bag. Jose Ramirez sat across the aisle beside Daniel Rivera. His binder was thicker this time, though less confident in its posture. The courtroom clerk called the case. Margaret stood first. Your Honor, we are seeking confirmation of sole property occupancy rights, acknowledgement of separate property status, and protective measures against continued interference. Judge Whitman nodded once. Proceed. Margaret moved carefully, almost academically. She entered into record the Peterson family trust formation document. Certified deed showing Abigail as sole beneficiary. 12 years of property tax statements. Insurance records. Bank transaction logs showing legal payments from joint funds. Documentation of attempted account authorization changes. Transcript and supporting affidavit regarding exterior security recording. Each item was labeled, handed to the clerk, and passed to the bench. No raised voices, no dramatic gestures, just paper. Rivera stood when it was his turn. Your Honor, my client believed the marital residence fell under community property classification due to long-term occupancy and shared expense contribution. Judge Whitman looked at the deed. When was the property acquired, she asked. Prior to marriage, Margaret answered. Judge Whitman flipped through the trust document. Has there been any written transmutation agreement, she asked. No, Your Honor, Rivera admitted. Any mortgage paid down using community funds? Number. Judge Whitman removed her glasses briefly. Then separate property status appears clear. The sentence landed without emphasis. Jose's jaw tightened slightly. Rivera shifted strategies. My client's concern, he said, carefully centered on financial sustainability given petitioner's medical condition. Margaret did not react. Judge Whitman looked at Jose directly. "Did you attempt to restrict internet access?" she asked. Jose hesitated. "I upgraded security," he said. "Did you change utility account access? I reorganized accounts. Did you contact law enforcement absent threat? I was concerned." Judge Whitman paused. "Concern does not equate to interference, authority," she said evenly. Margaret stood again. "Your Honor, we also submit evidence of expressed intent to pressure petitioner into vacating." She handed up the porch call transcript. Judge Whitman read silently. The courtroom air felt denser. Jose avoided looking toward Abigail. Judge Whitman finished reading. "Mr. Ramirez," she said calmly, "did you state? If I push the right way, she'll fold." Jose swallowed. "I was frustrated." "Did you state once she's out, it's cleaner silence?" "Yes," he admitted. The admission did not echo. It settled. Judge Whitman folded the transcript carefully. "This court does not view strategic coercion of an ill spouse favorably," she said. Her tone was not angry. It was clinical. Margaret spoke once more. "Petitioner seeks limited protective measures, prohibition against interference with utilities accounts or residential access, confirmation of exclusive ownership, and structured separation discussions." Judge Whitman nodded. "Granted." The gavel did not slam. It tapped lightly. Orders were issued. Abigail Peterson confirmed sole legal owner of the Alder Ridge Drive property. Jose Ramirez prohibited from altering utilities locks or account access. Joint financial transactions subject to transparency, pending marital dissolution proceedings. Further interference subject to contempt review. No applause. No visible reaction from Abigail. She simply exhaled. Procedure had done what argument could not. After the hearing, the hallway outside the courtroom felt quieter than before. Jose stood several feet away from her. "I never meant for this to go that far," he said. Abigail looked at him calmly. "It didn't," she replied. "It went exactly as far as it needed to." He shook his head. "You made me look like you documented yourself," she said softly. The words were not cruel, they were accurate. Rivera approached briefly. "We'll move toward structured settlement discussions," he said to Margaret. Margaret nodded. That would be appropriate. As people filtered past them in the hallway, strangers with their own disputes, their own paperwork, Abigail felt no surge of triumph. Only stillness. She had not humiliated him in court. She had not described him as abusive. She had not raised her voice. She had presented a timeline, evidence, ownership, intent. Judge Whitman's order did the rest. Outside, the California sun was bright and indifferent. Jose paused before walking toward the parking lot. "You could have handled this privately," he said. "I tried," she replied. He looked at her differently now, not as adversary, not as dependent, but as someone he had underestimated. Power, when quiet, is often misread as absence. He had misread. Abigail walked toward her car without haste. Her energy was still limited. Treatment had not magically ended because legal clarity arrived. But something fundamental had shifted. The house was no longer contested. The record was no longer hidden. And the court had placed structure around what had once been intimidation. When she returned home later that afternoon, the house felt unchanged. The same light fell across the hardwood floors. The same faint creak near the staircase landing. Jose entered behind her, slower this time. He did not move toward the router. He did not adjust a lock. He did not make a call. He went upstairs quietly. Abigail stood in the living room alone for a moment. Justice had not been loud. It had been procedural, and procedure had affirmed what had always been true. Ownership does not shift because someone raises their voice. It shifts only through a record. And the record was now sealed. Legal victories are rarely cinematic. They do not end with applause or visible collapse. They end with paperwork signed, filed, stamped. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, Abigail Peterson sat once again in Margaret Collins's office. This time, the atmosphere felt less tense, more administrative. Jose Ramirez had agreed through counsel to proceed with structured marital dissolution negotiations. There would be no battle over the house. That had already been settled. Margaret reviewed the draft agreement slowly. Separate property confirmed, she said. No claim against real estate asset. Joint account to be equitably divided after reimbursement of unauthorized legal expenditures. Abigail nodded. The reimbursement clause had not been her idea. It had been Margaret's. Funds used from joint account for occupancy removal strategy Margaret had explained earlier can reasonably be categorized as non-marital purpose. Jose had not contested it aggressively. He had contested nothing aggressively since court. Humility had replaced urgency. Spousal support discussion, Abigail asked quietly. Margaret adjusted her glasses. Given your temporary medical leave and his prior income statements, there is eligibility. However, you indicated you prefer minimal ongoing entanglement. I do, Abigail said. She did not want extended financial tethering, not because she wished to protect him, but because she wished to protect herself from continued proximity. They structured a short-term transitional support agreement, instead time-bound limited neutral. No punishment, no windfall, just recalibration. When Jose arrived later that afternoon to sign the documents, he appeared thinner, not physically, but structurally. His posture lacked the forward-leaning assertion it once carried. He reviewed the agreement without theatrics. No claim to the property, he read aloud quietly. Yes, Margaret confirmed. He signed. Ink meets paper without emotion. Abigail signed after him, not with shaking hands, not with visible satisfaction, just steady. Once completed, Margaret gathered the documents neatly. This concludes residential dispute matters, she said. Remaining dissolution process will proceed in standard timeline. Jose nodded. He stood. For a moment it seemed he might speak. Instead, he turned toward the door. Jose, Abigail said softly. He paused. I don't hate you, she said. The statement was unexpected. He looked at her carefully. I know, he replied. And for the first time, his voice held no strategy, only fatigue. Back at the house on Alder Ridge Drive, the atmosphere had changed. Not dramatically, but definitively. Jose began packing slowly over the next week. He moved through shared spaces with careful deliberation, sorting books, placing framed photographs into boxes, folding clothes into suitcases. Abigail did not supervise. She did not accelerate. She did not delay. She continued her treatment appointments, continued her reduced work hours, continued writing in her notebook. On Tuesday afternoon, Lily Morgan came by with fresh bread and quiet relief in her expression. It's over, Lily asked gently. The dispute is, Abigail replied, and the marriage concluding. Lily hesitated. Are you okay? Abigail considered the question honestly. Yes, she said. Not because it didn't hurt, but because clarity, even painful clarity, stabilizes. On Jose's final evening in the house, he stood in the living room alone for several minutes. Abigail observed from the hallway. This place? He began, then stopped. It's always been yours, he said finally. Yes, she replied. He nodded once. I should have asked. Yes. No bitterness. No mockery. Just acknowledgement. He left the next morning before sunrise. No slammed doors, no final argument. Just the sound of the front door closing softly behind him. The house exhaled, not because it had been under siege, but because tension once removed creates space. Abigail walked slowly through each room later that day. The guest bedroom now empty, the office cleared of his files, the kitchen unchanged except for absence. She paused near the front door, where the camera still rested beside the frame. Security is basic. She considered removing it, then decided against it. Protection is not about paranoia. It is about preparedness. That afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with her brown leather notebook open. The final entry under the heading Escalation had been written weeks ago. Now she turned to a fresh page. At the top she wrote, "Resolution." Beneath it, ownership affirmed, interference ceased, legal boundaries established, marriage concluded without spectacle. She closed the notebook gently. Her phone vibrated with a message from Margaret. "All filings accepted. You are clear to proceed independently." Independently. The word felt lighter than expected. Not triumphant, not lonely, simply accurate. The following week, Abigail scheduled a consultation with a real estate advisor, not Tyler Brooks, not anyone Jose had contacted. This time, it was her choice. Not to sell immediately, but to assess options. True options. Ownership allows patience. The advisor walked through the house respectfully. "Are you looking to list?" he asked. "I'm evaluating," she replied. And she meant it. The house was not leverage. It was foundation. Later that evening, as sunlight filtered through the windows her parents had once chosen, Abigail stood in the living room alone. No raised voices echoed in memory. No humiliation replayed loudly. Just sequence. He had attempted to push. She had documented. He had escalated. She had aligned. The court had affirmed. She had not humiliated him in return. She had not weaponized victory. She had simply maintained record. Justice, when quiet, does not bruise. It corrects. The house on Alder Ridge Drive remained steady, not because conflict had never touched it, but because documentation had shielded it. Abigail walked upstairs and opened the safe. Inside, the trust documents rested beside her notebook. She did not need to look at them. She already knew what they said. Ownership had never been uncertain, only unspoken. Now it was both spoken and sealed. And that was enough. The house on Alder Ridge Drive did not feel victorious. It felt quiet. 3 months after Jose Ramirez moved out, autumn settled gently over Irvine. The air cooled just enough in the evenings to require a light sweater. The bougainvillea along the side fence thinned slightly, petals dropping without ceremony onto the stone walkway. Abigail Peterson stood in the kitchen one morning, watching sunlight stretch across the hardwood floors her father had refinished years ago. Her hair had grown back in soft, uneven layers. Her final chemotherapy scan showed no detectable active disease. Remission. The word had been delivered calmly by Dr. Patel, accompanied by careful qualifiers and scheduled follow-ups. Still, it felt like breath returning. Life, however, does not restart with dramatic music. It resumes quietly. Abigail returned to full-time work in phases. Her colleagues welcomed her back without spectacle. Her supervisor adjusted deadlines without condescension. She rebuilt stamina, deliberately measured walks in the evening, small home projects completed without urgency. The legal dissolution finalized without further contest. Jose did not challenge the agreement. He did not request revision. He signed where required. There were no final accusations, no late-night messages, only silence, structured and mutual. One afternoon, Abigail received a forwarded notification from the county recorder's office confirmation of updated marital status documentation tied to her legal name. She read it once and archived it. The brown leather notebook now rested on her desk, thinner than before. Most pages were filled. She flipped through them occasionally, not to relive pain, but to understand sequence. Dates, statements, escalations, resolution. The pattern was clear in hindsight. It always is. What surprised her most was not Jose's attempt to remove her. It was how certain he had been that she would fold. Illness in his calculation equaled vulnerability. He had mistaken physical weakness for structural fragility. They are not the same. One evening in late October, Lily Morgan visited again. They sat on the back patio with tea, the sky fading into amber behind distant palm trees. "Do you ever regret not telling him sooner?" Lily asked carefully. About the house, Abigail replied, "Yes." Abigail considered the question without defensiveness. "No," she said. Lily raised an eyebrow slightly. He built his position on assumption. Abigail continued. Telling him earlier would not have changed that instinct. It would only have delayed exposure. Lily nodded slowly. "That's very you," she said. Abigail smiled faintly. She did not feel triumphant. She felt educated. In the weeks that followed, she made a decision about the house. Not out of fear, not out of reaction, out of clarity. She would keep it, not because it symbolized victory, but because it had always been hers. Foundation matters. She repainted the guest bedroom in a lighter shade, reorganized the office without Jose's files occupying half the shelves, donated unused furniture quietly. No grand reinvention, just adjustment. One afternoon, she opened the exterior camera app and reviewed the July 28th footage one final time. She did not watch the entire clip. She deleted it from active storage, leaving only the archived legal copy retained by Margaret. Not out of denial, out of closure. Evidence had served its purpose. It did not need to live in daily memory. Weeks later, she received a brief email from Jose. No subject line. "I was wrong about a lot of things. I hope you stay well." No apology formatted formally. No self-justification. Just acknowledgement. She read it once, then archived it. Forgiveness, she understood, does not require reconciliation. It requires release. On a quiet Sunday morning, Abigail sat at the kitchen table with her notebook open to the final blank page. She wrote, "Strength is not volume. Documentation is not revenge. Silence is not surrender." She paused, then added, "Ownership must be understood before it is defended." She closed the notebook gently. Outside, a neighbor walked a golden retriever past the front gate. A delivery truck moved slowly down the street. The world continued indifferent and steady. Abigail rose and walked through the house one more time, not inspecting, not auditing, simply inhabiting. The living room where Jose once declared authority. The porch where he believed no one could hear him. The office where she archived evidence before dawn. Each space held memory. None held resentment. She paused by the front door. Security is basic, but so is clarity. Jose had tried to push her out of a house he never owned. He had misjudged leverage. He had misjudged her. But she had not answered humiliation with humiliation. She had not weaponized illness. She had not retaliated publicly. She had preserved, presented, proceeded, and then stepped forward. Later that afternoon, she scheduled a small gathering with close friends, nothing dramatic, no speeches. Just dinner. Lily, Danielle, Harper, a few colleagues. They ate at the long dining table her parents once hosted holidays around. At one point, Danielle raised her glass. "To quiet strength," she said. Abigail smiled. "To documentation," Lily added with a grin. Laughter followed, light, unforced. Abigail did not correct them. She did not diminish the moment. She simply absorbed it. After everyone left and the dishes were stacked neatly in the sink, she stood alone in the kitchen. The house was quiet again. Not because conflict had never entered, but because it had been resolved without spectacle. She turned off the lights one by one and walked upstairs. The brown leather notebook remained on her desk. Closed, complete, not as a weapon, as record. Because some battles are not won through argument. They are won through alignment. And alignment, once established, does not need to be announced. It simply stands. If this story stayed with you, let it settle for a moment. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It organizes, it files, it waits. And when the time comes, it speaks through documents instead of volume. If you believe dignity can be quiet and still unshakable, consider supporting stories like this. You can like the video if it resonated. You can share your thoughts below, especially where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It's grounding to see how far quiet strength travels. And if you value stories where truth unfolds slowly, without spectacle, you're welcome to subscribe. Not for noise, for clarity.